Liberation. Now today, which is first Sunday of the year, isn't it? I want to talk about personal liberation. I want to approach thinking about this first by looking at some of the gauges, if you will, of what's been going on in American culture itself. Our contemporary American culture that we're trying to live through today. I'm not going to talk about the wars and immigration and that kind of thing. I want to look a little bit at the more subtle changes within our civilization, if we can really call it that. As I said last week, for me anyway, one way to keep my head from exploding is to focus on what I can do in this huge world of all kinds of problems. Do you know what the number one fast food product bought in America was last year? Big Mac still is in the top 10, believe it or not. Cinnabon rolls. Domino's came in at a sad number 2. But there is something there. I just don't know what. The humanist philosopher John Dewey once wrote that the business of religion is to make us conscious of our identification with humanity at large and to recognize our knowledge and faith and ideals as the product of the cooperative operations of human beings living together. Notice how much community is in those words. Now, two big things as Dewey saw it: to make us conscious of our identification with humanity at large and to recognize our knowledge and faith and ideals as the products of the cooperative operations of human beings living together. Meaning, in other words, we are social animals whose ideas generate from the fact that we are living as social animals. I think Dewey's right about all of that, yet it seems true that the usual way we human beings reason is from our personalities to our ideas. By which I mean that people who live in fear communicate fear. They create scenarios and stories of fear. People with vision and courage communicate vision and courage. Yet there is the other thing we have out here, kind of as an outlier, but it makes a lot of difference, or I hope I'm going to convince you of that today, and that is the mystical experience. Now, as John Dewey would have been quick to point out, mysticism is experience. He was all about experience. Education is experience. Going in nature is experience. Religion is experience. Everything is experience, and a mystical experience is a personal, subjective experience, right? Dewey didn't see anything supernatural at all in a mystical experience. He saw mystical experiences as human experiences growing out of our collective human consciousness. Now, we all know a mystical experience is subjective. It's a very personal experience. Yet Dewey argued the point of mystical experience for us is to bring that experience back into the collective, the human collective consciousness, as a contribution to better society. You don't just sit out there on mountains and have experiences. You come back down the mountain to share with others. But before I get there, I want to think about a couple other things about our culture besides Cinnabon rolls. Take, for example, an article from the January Atlantic Monthly. Why is parenting so hard these days in the richest country in the world? Here in the U.S., facility structures all across our culture are under extreme pressure, and parents and children are the first to fall victim to this angst. This is what many families carry with them today. And this from the Brookings Institute. Before the virus, the U.S. boasted robust stock markets and record low levels of unemployment, yet 20% of prime-aged males were out of the labor force. From 2005 to 2019, an average of 70,000 Americans died annually from deaths of despair. That's suicide, drug overdose, and alcohol poisoning. These deaths are concentrated among less than college-educated middle-aged whites, with those out of the labor force disproportionately represented. Low-income minorities are significantly more optimistic than whites and much less likely to die of these deaths. Brookings Institute concludes this from that. This despair reflects the decline of the white working class. It contributes to our decreasing geographic mobility and has political spillovers. Counties with more respondents reporting lost hope in the years before 2016 were more likely to vote for Trump. Now, another thing about American psyche here is what's known as the Great Dechurching that I've talked quite a bit about. It's the spiritual but not really religious phenomenon, SBNRs as they're being called nowadays. Now, one of the interesting things about this group is how the Great Dechurching is playing out. 20 years ago, we thought that everyone would become a liberal. Well, that didn't happen. Guess what, right? So 30 years ago, if someone stopped going to church, the most likely reason was a growing skepticism about what was going on there. The old model led many to think that more and more people would become Unitarian Universalists or Humanists or something like that. But it didn't happen, and why is a good question. Now, my suspicion is that the reason for most people leaving religious institutions is not skepticism, but boredom. The skepticism that we religious liberals thought would lead to people choosing creedless traditions such as ours has actually led to a cafeteria-style view of religions. At the moment, according to Pew, who does a lot of research on this, 22% of Americans are categorized as spiritual but not religious, SBNRs, because they say they think of themselves as spiritual or they consider spirituality very important in their lives, but they neither think of themselves as religious nor say religion is important. 58% of Americans fall into the net religious category. Of those, 48% go to church and consider religion important. 10% say religion is not important, they are spiritual, but practicing. And then there's this third group, as around 21% of Americans are categorized as neither spiritual nor religious because they don't think of themselves as spiritual, don't think of themselves as religious, don't consider spirituality very important in their lives, and don't consider religion very important at all. Now, if you begin looking at the bar graphs, we see some very odd things happening. And yes, statisticians will quickly, and sociologists will quickly see that the way the questions are being asked are a little odd, actually, not in the way that I think we would ask them. But, for example, a huge number of people who claim Christianity as their religion believe in reincarnation. Now, reincarnation is heresy in Christianity. The Pope will tell you that. I'll tell you that, okay? My guess is that many Christians have decided that traditional teachings about an afterlife just don't make sense. Where's heaven? Where's hell? And so they've begun to say, well, I think I'm going to think about this science stuff and see if I can come up with another reason for an afterlife. And I think that may be the reason. Paradoxically, people are making their Christianity make sense to them, even if it doesn't make sense within the religious tradition they happen to be practicing. Kind of interesting, and we didn't see that one coming, but probably we should, because Cinnabons are the biggest selling item in America. Now, do hear me, I'm not condemning the mixing of religious ideas. The KFC bowl for $3 where you get a pound of food is the American way. We just throw stuff together and it's yummy. We don't worry about it being logical or good for us. Now, philosophically, I follow John Dewey in that I am a pragmatist, and for pragmatists, ideas are tools. If an idea works, it's true, and it's right, and you go right ahead doing it. I know that's a little bit radical for some people, but I do believe it's true. It explains how people make it through life. Yet, as we look at some of the gauges on our culture, what we're seeing is a continuation of Protestant Christianity, I would say, by other means. Protestants continue to protest, and they continue to insist that the individual has the final say of religious conscience, something we've been about forever. Which may be leading to something else. An article from the Guardian newspaper in the UK has this headline: "The zeitgeist is changing. A strange romantic backlash to the tech era looms." Now, that caught my attention, so I had to read it. Now, this is romantic in the case of the European romantic movement, something that we generally call transcendentalism here in the U.S., but it was a reaction against the Enlightenment, reason, science, and logic, and all of that. Now, the author ends his essay this way. He says, "The modern creative class, beleaguered enough, barraged by 2 decades of digital technology that has radically cheapened music, television, and cinema, is ready for combat, as the successful writers and actors strikes demonstrated earlier this year. Newer writing platforms like Substack promise a discursive, algorithm-free mode of communication with the glorious, shaggy, and strange-finding new readers. Naturally, in the romantic tradition, Substack elevates the individual." Now, for now, rapacious tech still has a mass buy-in, he says. Smartphones are ubiquitous. Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and Google are hegemonic. Mark Zuckerberg scopes his pharaonic Hawaii compound. Yeah, this guy's good. I've never seen pharaonic used as an adjective before. He and his ilk own the present. Whether they own the future, furthermore, is no longer clear. Generational change is hard on the incumbents, and romanticism won't hold still. It promises, at the minimum, a wild and unsteady flame. What it burns is still anyone's guess. Yeah, let's think about this for a moment. Because Romanticism, in its first incarnation in Europe, included both beautiful art and guillotines. So let's see what the BBC's Horrible Histories has to say about British Romanticism. This was a BBC production doing British history, and the interesting thing is they get the facts right, even though sometimes the music is a little, out of time. What would a return to Romanticism today mean? And is it happening? Is the question I'm thinking about. Well, you heard it here first. Christian Bale teams up with Batman co-star in Bride of Frankenstein remake. A new romanticism? Do you think they'll get the Frankenstein right? Don't know. Let's look at the cannabis law phenomenon that's going on about romanticism, shall we? I can't even get couldn't find an up-to-date illustration because this is changing so fast in the country. It's sweeping the country. Again, is it a new romanticism? Don't know. My old teacher of poetry, Allen Ginsberg, certainly saw a connection between some substance use and religious experience and mystical experience. Yeah, he was out on the street a lot with various signs over time. Ginsberg let it out, shall we say. This is the tradition that I come out of, and it's now getting a little agey. But here's another gauge of the American psyche that I think is very important. Pew Research says that 49% of Americans today report having at least one mystical experience. 49%, almost half. Now, for context, in 1960, when it was really the high end of church attendance in the U.S., only about 20% of Americans said they had had a mystical experience. So, what is changing? Is it that mystical experience and the growth of the spiritual but not religious is somehow related? Or is it just that the 60s happened? I don't really know. But something is in there about mysticism and romanticism, I do believe. As he told a story, Allen Ginsberg's call to be a poet was a mystical experience. He was reading William Blake one night aloud, and he heard Blake's voice taking over from his voice. And one aspect of a mystical experience is that it tends to be very important to the individual who has it, but other people, meh, well, they don't really get it unless you communicate it very well, because mystical experiences, again, are subjective. But why do people want that experience? Why is it so convincing to have one, even though that other people say, well, meh? Besides being subjective and difficult to articulate, reports of mystical experiences usually mention three feelings that I think we will call religious or spiritual or whatever: oceanic boundlessness, ego dissolution, and universal interconnectedness. If you felt that, you know exactly what that means. These are the patterns that lead to a dissolution of self that many religious traditions consider to be the only way through the door into a broader conception of the universe. Also, there is what's known as a noetic quality to mystical experiences. You're convinced that you know something after you have one, even, again, if others won't listen. Which is why artists and mystics and such do like these so much, I think. Having a mystical experience can't be communicated, really. It's ineffable. You can't come up with the words. It's always spilling out. And that's certainly why I like it as an artist. In addition, there's what is known within this tradition of mystical experience from William Blake. And I'm going backwards here in time to kind of catch into this. But many people know this particular quote from William Blake. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man, sexist language, people, as it is, infinite. For people have closed themselves up till we see all things through narrow chinks in our cavern. Now, you know this if you were alive back in the days of the doors. That's where they got their name, was from the William Blake quote about the doors of perception. Now, he says, and I think, and again, Jim Morrison was very into Ginsberg and Dylan and this sort of thing, but he never quite came up, I think, to the level of poet. But his rock lyrics are not bad. But he says, I'm talking to you, myself. Let's recreate the world. The palace of conception is burning. You know exactly what I do. You know exactly what I do. Everything. All right. Now, this is a tradition of mysticism that goes all the way back to Blake, and before that, of course. But I know where the Doors got the term doors, and that was from the Aldous Huxley book by that name. This tradition of mysticism goes back to Aldous Huxley, who is the one who really got the drugs idea mixed into it, although that had been, of course, part of the tradition all the way back. Another reason those romantics died young, of course, right? Now, drugs don't appear to have actually been the source of William Blake's mysticism. He seems to have had some other kinds of mental things going on. But there's William Blake, and the lines I've been quoting appear in a poem called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Blake's question in that work is this: how do we, creatures in the social bounds, how do we liberate our own minds? Back to my original point. How do we liberate our own minds? Blake's answer is mystical experience. And this is the page that he wrote in which he writes those lines. They come at the very bottom of the page. Some of you know that Blake was a printer and did a lot of etching, and so his writing actually always appears in his handwriting with illustrations. Right? Now, I don't have the educational background to read the National Library of Medicine, but our ministerial intern back there, David Buckley, does, and he sent me an interesting article this week because he knew I was talking about mysticism. So let me look at this. He says, this is from the health thing. The mystical experience is I don't know about that stuff. The mystical experience is a potential psychological mechanism to influence outcome in psychedelic therapy. It includes features such as osiotic boundlessness, ego dissolution, and universal interconnectedness, which have been closely linked to both symptom reduction and improved quality of life. Blake would be proud, and so would Allen Ginsberg. Some of you know the history of this. We had a huge moral